It covers the heart of a continent that also no longer exists in the form we know. The water is warm, warmer than any ocean we would recognize today. And it is shallow in places and very deep in others, and it stretches from what will become Europe in the east to what will become the Western Americas in the west. This is not the ocean the first sailors crossed. This is not even the ancestor of that ocean in any recognizable sense. This is something older by 200 million years, an ocean that operated by different rules, that was home to different chemistry and different weather, and a sky that received a slightly cooler sun than we now know. The world was younger. The continents were still in transit. Things had not yet settled into their current arrangement. Picture the surface of that water at midday. There is no land visible from where we float. Only a flat horizon and a sky that seems somehow larger than the sky we know, as if the atmosphere itself is slightly thicker here. The water is calm. Below the surface, the world is already moving, shapes in the shallows, schools of shelled animals spiraling through the current, their spirals precise and ancient. Fish unlike anything living today, threading the mid-water. And deeper down, in the zone where the light grows green and then grey, and then gives out entirely, shapes that are larger, much larger. One of them rises. There is no warning. One moment the surface is unbroken. The next, a head emerges. Long and narrow, jaw-carrying teeth that are cone-shaped and interlocking. The eyes are the largest eyes of any vertebrate that has ever lived on this planet. Each one catches the midday light and holds it. This animal breathes, and you understand in looking at it that breathing is something it has chosen to do, that it has come up from somewhere below specifically for this, and that it will return to that somewhere the moment the breath is complete. It takes in air. It descends. The water closes behind it without ceremony, as if nothing has broken the surface at all. That animal will be found in limestone 180 million years from now. Not in this ocean, which will dry and consolidate and become rock over geological ages. In the rock, its bones will be compressed and preserved by the weight of time, and the people who find those bones will stand over them in silence, working out what they are looking at. Tonight we go back to that ocean. We are going back to the Mesozoic seas, before the whales and dolphins, before anything that looks like the ocean life we now know. We are going to learn what ruled the water for 180 million years, and what the stone still holds of their lives, and what it means that they are gone. This is not a journey about monsters. The word is too small for what lived here. It is a journey into deep time, into an ocean with its own logic and its own extraordinary silences. If you find this slow, quiet exploration of mystery something you genuinely enjoy, I'd be grateful if you'd like the video and subscribe. Letting me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you is always a quiet comfort. Now find your comfortable position. Dim the lights. Take a slow breath. We are leaving the map behind. The word sea monster carries a particular kind of weight. We find it at the edges of old maps, in the margins, where the known world gives out. The cartographers, having nothing to draw, drew creatures. Serpents the size of islands coiling around ships. Finned beasts, with the head of a wolf and the tail of a fish. Vast and vaguely mammalian shapes, rising from the deep to swallow anything that ventured too far from the shore. These images were not documentary. They were honest confessions of ignorance arranged as warning. They said, in effect, that past this line, the sea holds things we have not seen and cannot name. We have spent centuries assuming those images were pure invention. The monsters on the old maps were wrong in their specifics, and we have tended to conclude from this that the impulse itself was wrong, that the deep water was never home to anything that warranted that kind of fear or awe, that the legends were the product of minds that had no better tool for the darkness at the world's edge than fantasy. This assumption is incorrect. For most of the history of complex animal life on this planet, the ocean was ruled by reptiles, not fish, not the ancestors of today's whales or dolphins, reptiles, air-breathing animals closely related to the things that walked the land and ate leaves and hunted in forests, that had returned to the sea and had adapted to it with a completeness that still produces a particular kind of pause in anyone who studies it. They dominated the ocean for more than 180 million years. This is not a brief episode in the history of life. 180 million years is longer than the entire time that has passed since the last of them died. It is a span of time so large that placing it next to anything human-scaled makes the human scale disappear. They evolved into forms so specialized, so precisely tuned to the requirements of a life spent in water, that the bodies they arrived at looked nothing like the land animals they came from. An ichthyosaur does not look like a lizard. A mosasaur, in motion through dark water, does not look like a snake. They look like what the sea required them to look like. The sea is a demanding place, and it reshapes over millions of years whatever enters it. The sea monsters of legend were inventions, but the impulse behind them was not. The instinct that the ocean holds things we have not seen, that the deep water is not empty, that something vast and patient waits below the surface of the known world. That instinct was right. The creatures on those old maps were wrong in their details. The truth was stranger than any of them managed to imagine. The stone that holds their bones does not exaggerate. The stone remembers exactly what was there. Every story of the ancient sea rulers begins on land. This seems counterintuitive, but the logic is exact. Approximately 310 million years ago, early reptiles evolved the amniotic egg. This was one of the most consequential inventions in the history of life. An egg that carried its own water supply inside a protective membrane, so that the embryo no longer needed to be deposited in a pond or a stream, or any external body of water to develop. The amniotic egg freed vertebrate life from its dependence on aquatic environments. It allowed reptiles to move deep into dry continents, to colonize deserts and mountains, and the vast inland spaces that amphibians had never reached. It was a gift of extraordinary scope. And then, tens of millions of years later, certain lineages of reptile looked at the sea and went back. This happened not once, but multiple times, independently, across different reptile groups and different geological periods. The return to water was not a single evolutionary event that radiated outward into all the forms we know. It was a solution that different branches of the reptile family tree arrived at separately. The ocean was offering the same invitation to all of them: abundant food, a new and largely unoccupied ecological space, and room for any body plan that could solve the basic problems of aquatic life. Each group solved those problems in its own way. Each arrived at the sea by a slightly different road, but the destination was the same. The transition was gradual in each case. A land animal does not become a sea animal in a single generation, or 1,000 generations, or even 10,000. The fossil record shows us the intermediate stages in some lineages, with remarkable clarity. Animals that were clearly more comfortable in water than on land, but still retained features of their terrestrial ancestors. Limbs that had begun to flatten into paddles, but still showed the general proportions of walking legs. Nostrils positioned slightly higher on the skull than in a land animal, beginning the long migration toward the top of the head. Tails that were lengthening and thickening, taking on more of the work of propulsion. Over millions of years, the sea reshaped these animals. The limb became the flipper. The nostril became the blowhole, or migrated to the top of the snout. The body streamlined itself. The tail developed into the instrument of propulsion. The eyes enlarged. The lung learned to hold more air for longer intervals. The eggs disappeared and live birth appeared, cutting the last cord to the land. Because a reptile that cannot come ashore to lay eggs is committed to the sea in a way that nothing short of extinction can undo. What emerged from this process was a series of animals so adapted to marine life that they looked to our eyes more like fish or dolphins than like the land reptiles they descended from. This is what evolution does. Given enough time and the right pressures, it takes something and makes it into something else. Not quickly, not easily, but completely. The Triassic began approximately 252 million years ago. The marine reptiles were already in the water by then. The ocean was ready for them, and they were ready for the ocean. The ichthyosaurs were the first to fully master the sea, and the form they settled into tells us everything about what the sea requires of any animal that tries to move through it quickly. The body was torpedo-shaped, not metaphorically torpedo-shaped in the way we sometimes describe a fast swimmer, but literally and precisely torpedo-shaped, with the widest point just behind the pectoral flippers and a clean taper toward the tail. The tail itself ended in a crescent fin held vertically, driven by the muscles of the lower back and hip in a side-to-side oscillation. The dorsal fin on the upper back provided stability. The forelimbs had become paddles, and the bones inside those paddles had multiplied over evolutionary time, packing in extra phalanges to create stiff and precise control surfaces. The nostrils sat near the top of the long, narrow snout. The eyes were set to either side of the skull, positioned for the widest possible field of vision. This is the body of the dolphin, arrived at by a completely different route, across a gap of more than 150 million years. The dolphins evolved from land mammals that entered the sea approximately 50 million years ago. The ichthyosaurs evolved from land reptiles that entered the sea approximately 250 million years ago. The two groups have no close relationship. They arrived at nearly identical body plans independently, because the sea imposes the same physical requirements on any animal that tries to move through it at speed, and the optimal solution to those requirements turns out to be the same shape every time. Scientists call this convergent evolution. What it demonstrates is that the rules of physics, applied to biology over sufficient time, will produce the same answer from different starting points. The ichthyosaurs were present in the sea from the earliest Triassic. By the middle of the Jurassic period, approximately 170 million years ago, they had diversified into dozens of species, ranging from the size of a large tuna to the size of a whale. The largest was Shastasaurus, which may have reached lengths of more than 20 meters, and would have been one of the largest animals to have ever lived. Most were considerably smaller, between 2 and 5 meters, fast-moving and capable of sustained speeds that would surprise us. They hunted fish and squid-like animals in water that was still warm enough to support an enormous diversity of prey. We know that at least some species of ichthyosaur gave birth to live young in the open ocean. Fossils found in Germany and in England have preserved pregnant females with embryos visible inside them, positioned head down for delivery. One particularly remarkable specimen from a quarry in Germany shows a female ichthyosaur in the process of giving birth at the moment of her death. The young animal partially emerged, and the detail of it, the specificity of it, makes the abstract fact of a reptile giving birth in the middle of the Jurassic Ocean into something immediate, something that happened to a specific animal on a specific day. They lived in the ocean. They gave birth in the ocean. They died in the ocean. The ichthyosaurs were committed to the sea in every sense of the word. And for 160 million years, the sea held them. There is one feature of the ichthyosaurs that stops every conversation about them. Not the size, not the speed, the eye. The ichthyosaur, known as Temnodontosaurus plateodon, possessed eyes that measured approximately 20 centimeters across. This is the size of a large dinner plate. It is the largest eye, both in absolute terms and in proportion to body size, of any vertebrate known to have existed. No living whale has ever matched it. Not the sperm whale that dives to 3,000 meters in total darkness. Not the giant squid with its famously enormous eye. The eye of Temnodontosaurus was larger than all of them. The reason was the deep water. Light does not persist in the ocean. In the shallows, in the warmly lit zone where the sun reaches the bottom, the eye of any ordinary animal is sufficient. But as you descend, the light begins to thin. By 100 meters, the brighter wavelengths are gone. By 200 meters, what remains is a faint and bluish twilight. Below that lies what oceanographers call the midnight zone. It is dark in a way that the surface world never is. Not the darkness of a closed room or a cloudy night, but a darkness that is total and complete, and has been total and complete for longer than life has existed in that water. In that darkness, there is still light. It is produced by the animals themselves, the cold blue-green glow of bioluminescence, flashing in the water like a moving city seen from altitude. To find food in that environment, or to avoid becoming food, an animal needs an eye that can gather the faint photons of bioluminescent light and assemble them into an image. The larger the eye, the more light it can collect. The larger the pupil that opens in low light conditions, the more of the available light reaches the retina. We know the exact dimensions of the ichthyosaur eye, because it was supported by a ring of interlocking bones called sclerotic ossicles, and those bones fossilize extremely well. When you look at an ichthyosaur skull, you can see the ossicle ring sitting in the eye socket, like a ring of ivory, and you can measure it precisely, and from those measurements you can calculate the size of the eye with a confidence that feels strange, given how long ago the animal lived. What Temnodontosaurus saw in the midnight zone of the Jurassic Ocean, we can only imagine. We know it dove there routinely. We know the eye was built for that specific darkness. And we know that in the cold, dark water below, 200 meters, while everything above was sunlit and warm, there was an animal the size of a large dolphin, navigating by its own extraordinary vision. It was finding things that had tried to disappear into the deep. The darkness was not protection from an eye like that. The darkness was the medium it was designed to see through. There is something about this that resists easy summarizing. An eye that large, in a skull that narrow, looking at water that has not seen the sun since before humans existed. The ichthyosaur's great eye is still there, in the fossil, in the stone, the ring of bones precisely preserved. It still holds the shape of what it once was. It does not tell us what it saw, but it tells us that it saw. Here is the constraint that defined every marine reptile that ever lived. They breathed air, not the dissolved oxygen that fish extract through their gills. Atmospheric air, drawn in through nostrils or a blowhole positioned near the top of the skull, held in lungs, and consumed minute by minute as the animal moved through the water. This is the fundamental biological fact of every creature in the ancient sea we are descending into tonight. The ichthyosaur, for all its dolphin-shaped perfection, was a reptile. The plesiosaur, for all its millions of years in the ocean, was a reptile. The mosasaur that would eventually come to rule the late Cretaceous seas was a reptile. Every one of them needed the surface the way you need it right now, lying in the dark. They needed air, the way everything that breathes needs air, regularly and without exception. This constraint shaped everything about how they lived. It determined how deep they could hunt before turning back. It governed the outer limit of any dive, not the creature's strength, or the temperature of the water, or the difficulty of the prey, but the finite supply of oxygen in the lungs. An ichthyosaur pursuing food into the midnight zone was operating against a clock it could not see. A clock that measured not time exactly, but the diminishing reserve of what it needed to live. At some point, regardless of what the prey was doing, the animal had to turn and ascend. The surface was not optional. It also meant that a serious injury sustained in the open ocean, one that prevented the animal from swimming to the surface and breathing, was not a survivable wound. There was no shelter at depth that could keep an animal alive while it healed. The ocean was generous in many respects, but it was not forgiving on this point. The constraint also shaped reproduction. An egg-laying reptile must come to land. The shore is the one place in the life cycle of most reptiles where the ocean gives way to the terrestrial. The ichthyosaurs solved this problem by eliminating the egg entirely. They gave birth to live young in the open water, young that were born with the reflexes and the body proportions to reach the surface and breathe within moments of their birth. The fossils of pregnant females tell us this. The fossil of the female in the act of giving birth tells us this with a directness that requires no interpretation at all. We picture these animals as creatures of the deep, and they were. But they were creatures of the surface too, in a way that was not incidental but fundamental. Every dive ended at the surface. Every birth happened at the surface or near it. The surface was not a world they had left behind. It was a world they visited every few minutes for as long as they lived. There is something about this arrangement that is, if you sit with it, quietly moving. The most adapted marine reptiles that ever existed still needed what we need. They needed to come up for air. The ocean held them, but could not entirely contain them. They were of two worlds, and neither world could fully claim them. The plesiosaurs arrived in the Mesozoic Sea with a body plan unlike anything that had come before them. 4 large flippers, arranged in 2 pairs, front and rear. Not legs, not paddles in the rough sense that the early ichthyosaurs had developed. True flippers with dozens of extra bones packed into each digit to create a stiff and powerful wing-like surface. These animals did not swim the way fish swim, driving themselves forward with a tail. They flew through the water, pulling themselves forward with long and slow synchronous strokes of all 4 limbs in a motion closer to the movement of a sea turtle or a penguin than to anything we would ordinarily call swimming. Each stroke began with the leading edge of the flipper angling slightly downward, then sweeping back and up to generate lift and thrust simultaneously. The way a wing in air generates lift. The physics were the same. The medium was denser. They appeared in the late Triassic, approximately 215 million years ago, and they would remain in the ocean until the very last moment of the Cretaceous. They outlasted the ichthyosaurs, who disappeared from the fossil record roughly 90 million years ago, for reasons that are still debated. They were still present in the ocean at the time of the mass extinction 66 million years ago, which means the plesiosaurs spent 150 million years in the sea, an expanse of time so large that the distance between their first appearance and their extinction is greater than the distance between their extinction and right now. But what makes the plesiosaurs truly remarkable is not their longevity. It is that they arrived at the sea in 2 distinct body plans that were almost perfectly opposite in their proportions, and both of those plans succeeded so well that the ocean supported them simultaneously for the entire duration of the group's existence. The first plan, a long neck, sometimes extraordinarily long, attached to a relatively compact body, with a small head at the end. The teeth in that small head were long and needle-like, designed not to kill but to hold, to reach into a school of fish or a cloud of belemnites and grip whatever was there, the way a hand pushed into water closes around whatever it touches. Elasmosaurus, one of the largest of this type, had 72 neck vertebrae. A human neck contains 7. The neck of Elasmosaurus was so long that when the first complete skeleton was examined in 1868, the scientist who named it attached the skull to what he believed was the front of the animal. It was the tail. The neck and the tail had been reversed, because the neck was so long that it seemed impossible. The second plan reversed every proportion. Short neck, enormous head, long and conical fangs, designed not to grip, but to kill. These were the plesiosaurs, and they occupied the top of the ocean's food chain in a way the long-necked forms never could. 2 designs, 1 ocean, and between them they had covered most of its possibilities. At the top of the Jurassic Ocean, there is a gap. It is not visible from the surface. From the surface, the Jurassic Sea looks like every other open ocean. Water moving in its own patterns, light reaching the first few meters, life going about its business in the upper layers where the sun arrives. But below the surface, In the midwater and deeper, there is a hierarchy. And at the top of that hierarchy, in the late Jurassic period, approximately 160 million years ago, sits a plesiosaur. Liopleurodon is the animal that most people encounter first in this story, often through documentary reconstructions that took considerable liberties with its actual size. The real animal was roughly 5 to 7 meters in length, which is the size of a large great white shark. Not small. A body of that size, built around 4 enormous flippers and a skull that made up a significant proportion of its total length, is a serious predator by any measure. The skull alone could reach nearly 1.5 meters in adults, and the jaw was equipped with conical teeth of a diameter that suggests prey taken by force and crushed rather than merely gripped. The bite force was among the greatest of any predator that has ever lived. The plesiosaurs were not ambush predators in the conventional sense. They were too large and too metabolically demanding for the patient waiting strategy. They hunted actively, using sensory organs that we are still reconstructing from the fossil evidence. There is reason to believe that some plesiosaurs could detect the electrical fields produced by other animals in the water, the same sense that sharks use to find prey in total darkness. There is reason to believe their sense of smell, or something functionally equivalent to smell, operated through the water rather than the air. Kronosaurus, a plesiosaur of the early Cretaceous, was considerably larger than Liopleurodon. Named for the Greek Titan who devoured his own children, it reached approximately 9 to 10 meters and possessed a skull of truly extraordinary proportions. The head alone accounted for nearly 1/3 of the total body length. Its teeth were not just large, but differentiated along the jaw. The front teeth designed for seizing prey, and the rear teeth designed for crushing the shells of the large ammonites and other armored animals. It ate alongside fish and other marine reptiles. This is the occupant of the apex in the Jurassic and early Cretaceous ocean, a creature whose skull is longer than a tall person, whose jaw force exceeded that of any modern predator, that hunted actively out in open water, using senses we are still working to understand. An animal for which we have no living equivalent and no easy frame of reference. A creature so precisely adapted to the top of the food chain that it needed no defenses at all. Nothing in its ocean ate it. There is something quiet and final about that kind of position. The plesiosaurs did not rule because they were cruel or indifferent. They ruled because the ocean had produced them, and the ocean had room for exactly one thing at that level. They filled the space perfectly, and for tens of millions of years, the space was theirs. The creatures that ruled the Mesozoic ocean left the world in the form of bones pressed into stone, and the person who found more of those bones than anyone else in the early history of the science was a young woman from Lyme Regis, on the southern coast of England, who had no formal education and no institutional affiliation, and whose name was almost erased from the record she spent her life creating. Mary Anning was born in the year 1800, in a small house near the cliffs of Lyme Regis, in the county of Dorset. The rock beneath those cliffs is Jurassic limestone and shale, laid down 180 million years ago, when the ocean we are describing tonight covered this part of England. The cliffs there erode continuously, releasing bones and shells from the rock as the sea eats the base of the stone and sections of the cliff give way. The material that falls to the beach is irreplaceable. The bones, once exposed, have a short window before the tide covers them again, or other weather breaks them apart. You have to be there at the right moment, and you have to know what you are looking at. Mary Anning knew. She had grown up collecting fossils with her father, who died when she was 11 and left the family in poverty. She continued collecting alone, selling what she found to supplement the family's income, selling to tourists and to the gentlemen geologists who came to Dorset from London and Oxford, and who would later publish papers about the extraordinary specimens she had found and located and excavated from the cliff face herself. When she was approximately 11 years old, she and her brother Joseph found a skull in the rock that was unlike any skull they had seen before. Over the following year, she excavated the rest of the skeleton. The first nearly complete ichthyosaur ever recovered, a creature no one had ever seen, no one had a name for, and no one fully understood. The skeleton was eventually sold and described by others. Mary received little formal credit. Over the following decades, she found the first nearly complete plesiosaur skeleton known to science. She found a pterosaur, the first ever found in Britain. She found a fish, Squaloraja, that was new to science. She found specimen after specimen from the Jurassic seafloor preserved in those Dorset cliffs, and she understood what she was finding in a way that many of the credentialed men who purchased her discoveries did not. The Geological Society of London did not admit women as members. Mary Anning could not attend the meetings where her discoveries were presented. She could not publish in their journal. What she received eventually was a small annual grant from the government, arranged on her behalf by the scientists who used her work, and honorary membership in the Geological Society, granted the year before her death. She died in 1847. The ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs she found were real. The record she built was exact. The stone on those cliffs was telling the truth, and she was one of the very few people who knew how to read it. To understand the creatures that ruled the Mesozoic ocean, we need to understand the ocean they ruled. And that ocean was not the ocean we know. The present-day Earth has a particular arrangement of continents and seas. The great oceans of the present day sit in configurations that have been roughly stable, in geological terms, for tens of millions of years. But in the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, the continents were arranged differently. Pangaea, the supercontinent that had united most of Earth's landmass, had been breaking apart since the Triassic, and by the middle of the Jurassic, roughly 170 million years ago, it had split into distinct landmasses that were still moving toward their current positions, still finding their way across the face of a planet that had not yet decided where to put them. In between those landmasses were seas. Not the deep ocean trenches of the modern world, but warm and shallow epicontinental seas. Body temperature waters spread across the low-lying edges of continents and flooding vast areas that are now dry land. The Tethys Sea, which filled the space between what would become Europe and Africa to the north, and what would become Asia and the Indian subcontinent to the south, was warm and richly oxygenated and teeming with life at every depth. It was the main arena of marine life for most of the Mesozoic. It is the sea where the ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs of the Jurassic did most of their living. These shallow epicontinental seas had qualities that no comparable body of water on Earth today possesses. Because they were shallow, the sun warmed them evenly. Because the continents were in different positions, the major ocean currents followed different paths and distributed heat across the globe, differently from the way they do now. The poles were warmer, the tropics were warmer still. There were no permanent ice caps in the Cretaceous. The sea level was higher than it is today by hundreds of meters, and vast areas of what are now continents were covered in water. The diversity of life in those seas reflected this richness. The ammonites, coiled-shelled cephalopods, among the most common marine fossils, existed in thousands of species. They range from forms the size of a coin to forms the size of a cartwheel. The belemnites, internally shelled squid-like animals, moved in vast numbers through the midwater. Fish were present in enormous diversity. The ocean floor was covered in a thick layer of organic material, and the invertebrate animals that lived in it. Every layer of the water column was occupied by something. Into this abundance the marine reptiles fit themselves with precision. The plesiosaurs ranged across all the major seas. The ichthyosaurs spread to every latitude, their fossils appearing in rocks from what is now the equator to what is now the polar regions. The ocean was generous, and the creatures it had produced were perfectly placed to receive that generosity. The world those animals lived in was not a primitive world or a simpler world. It was a different world, as complete as ours, as layered, as full, just built from different pieces. What did they eat? The question seems simple, and it is not. What the marine reptiles ate, and how they ate it, and how they competed with each other for the same prey, tells us something about how the ocean of the Mesozoic actually functioned as a system, not just as a collection of large and interesting animals. The ichthyosaurs were fish eaters primarily, and squid eaters, and hunters of the small to medium-sized animals that occupied the middle layers of the water column. The long, narrow jaw with its interlocking teeth is the anatomical record of this. A jaw designed for gripping fast-moving prey in water, not for tearing or crushing. Stomach contents preserved in ichthyosaur fossils have shown belemnite hooks and fish scales, the hard parts that survive digestion. An ichthyosaur ate the way a dolphin eats, seizing prey at speed, swallowing the soft parts whole, and letting the hard parts pass through. The long-necked plesiosaurs were also fish eaters and belemnite hunters, but the long neck gave them a hunting strategy unavailable to any other animal in the Mesozoic ocean. The current thinking is that the neck was used as a stealth instrument. The large body of the plesiosaur, trailing behind, was more likely to be detected by prey than the small head at the end of the long neck, moving slowly through the water ahead of it. The neck allowed the head to arrive in a school of fish before the rest of the animal was near enough to cause alarm. The plesiosaurs ate differently from everything else. The heavy skull and long conical fangs are the signature of a predator that took large prey. Other marine reptiles, large fish, possibly even other plesiosaurs. Bite marks consistent with pliosaur teeth have been found on ichthyosaur and plesiosaur bones. The ecosystem was not peaceful. At every level of the food chain, something was eating something else, and what sat above the pliosaurs was nothing. The ammonites deserve a specific mention, because they were the most abundant large invertebrates in the Mesozoic Sea, and they appeared on the menu of nearly every marine reptile that possessed teeth capable of dealing with a shell. Some ammonites were small and could be swallowed whole. Others grew to immense sizes, and a mature ammonite, more than a meter across, was beyond what most predators could address. But the juveniles, in their millions, drifted through the water column like an unending food source, and the marine reptiles that evolved teeth for crushing rather than gripping likely exploited them systematically. The ocean of the Mesozoic was a working system. It had energy flowing through it from the sun to the plankton, to the ammonites, to the fish, to the reptiles at the top. It had species filling every available space in that chain. It was as complete and as finely calibrated as any ecosystem before or since. The marine reptiles were not anomalies in that system. They were its highest expression, and like every system, it could be broken. Approximately 100 million years ago, something appeared in the warm, shallow seas of the late Cretaceous that had never been there before. It was a reptile, like the others. It breathed air, like the others. It gave birth to live young in the open water. Like the ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, it now shared the ocean with. But it was not like them in any other significant way. Its body was long and sinuous, and propelled primarily by a powerful side-to-side undulation of the tail, more like the motion of a large sea snake than the dolphin-like drive of the ichthyosaur or the four-flipper flight of the plesiosaur. Its closest living relatives were the monitor lizards, the large land predators that walk on four legs on every warm continent in the modern world. And the thing it had just done, the thing that the fossil record shows with the clarity of sudden absence, was replace the ichthyosaurs entirely. The ichthyosaurs had disappeared from the fossil record approximately 10 million years before the mosasaurs reached their full dominance. The ocean had been available. The mosasaurs filled it. The mosasaurs are the final rulers of the ancient sea, and they were the largest the ocean has ever contained. Mosasaurus hoffmanni, the largest known species, reached lengths of approximately 17 meters. This is longer than a city bus and heavier than any land predator in history. The body was covered in scales similar to those of modern snakes, smooth and overlapping, giving the animal a hydrodynamic surface that the water could slide past cleanly. The four limbs had become true flippers. The tail ended in a crescent fin similar to those of sharks and ichthyosaurs, another example of the ocean producing the same solution for high-speed propulsion from entirely different starting points. The skull of a large mosasaur is one of the most formidable things the fossil record has produced. The jaw was immense and could open to an angle that most modern predators can't achieve. But the most extraordinary feature of the mosasaur jaw was hidden inside. A second row of teeth on the roof of the mouth, on a bone called the pterygoid, positioned to help grip and direct prey down the throat. This is the same anatomy found in modern snakes, who use their pterygoid teeth to walk prey into their mouths in a ratcheting motion. The mosasaur was, in some sense, a snake that had gone to sea and become the dominant predator of its ocean. The mosasaurs spread rapidly. By 80 million years ago, they had colonized every major body of water on the planet. They diversified into dozens of species, each slightly different in its diet and body proportions, occupying different ecological niches within the same ocean system. Some were generalist predators. Some specialized in hard-shelled prey, developing blunt, rounded teeth for crushing. Some, like globidans, had teeth so round and pebble-like that they were clearly designed for ammonites or sea turtles and nothing else. The Cretaceous Ocean, in its final 20 million years, was the mosasaurs' ocean. It belonged to them the way the Jurassic Ocean had belonged to the plesiosaurs and the ichthyosaurs, completely, without competition from above. There is a place in the middle of North America where the fossils of sea creatures are found in rock that formed at the bottom of an ocean. The state of Kansas sits approximately 1,500 kilometers from the nearest coastline. It is landlocked on every side. The landscape is flat and dry and agricultural, given over to wheat and sunflowers, and the particular kind of space that comes from land that extends in every direction without interruption. It is not a place that suggests the sea. And yet beneath the Kansas soil, in the Cretaceous chalks and shales that extend across the center of the continent, there are mosasaurs. There are plesiosaurs. There are large predatory fish. There are the remains of sea turtles and giant bony fish and sharks, and all the other inhabitants of a marine ecosystem. In Kansas, in the middle of the continent, this is the record of the Western Interior Seaway for approximately 35 million years, from about 100 million years ago to 65 million years ago. A warm and shallow sea divided the continent of North America in two. It ran from what is now the Arctic Ocean in the north to what is now the Gulf of Mexico in the south, approximately 900 kilometers wide and 300 meters deep in places. And it covered an enormous swath of what are now the Great Plains states. The land that now grows wheat was at the bottom of this sea. The fossils that fall out of the Kansas chalk were the animals that lived in it. The Western Interior Seaway was not a minor body of water. It was a full ocean ecosystem, warm and rich and stocked with the same diversity of marine life that existed in the seas to the east and west. Mosasaurs hunted in it. Plesiosaurs moved through it. Scyphactinus, a large predatory fish that could reach nearly 6 meters in length, pursued its prey in mid-water with a jaw full of fang-like teeth. One famous Scyphactinus specimen found in the Kansas chalk contains the skeleton of a large fish inside its body cavity. It apparently swallowed the fish whole and then died of it. The two animals preserved together in the position of predator and prey. The chalk that holds these fossils was formed from the shells of microscopic marine organisms called coccolithophores, which bloomed in the warm water of the seaway and died and sank and accumulated on the seafloor over millions of years. The White Cliffs of Dover in England are made of the same material, formed at the same time in the Tethys Sea that covered northern Europe during the same Cretaceous period. The chalks of England and the chalks of Kansas are the same sediment from the same age of the world, separated by the accident of where the continents happened to be at the time they were deposited. When you stand on a chalky hillside in Kansas and see a mosasaur jaw in the rock, you are standing on the floor of a sea that no longer exists. The water is gone. The animals are gone. What remains is the stone, and the stone remembers everything. 200 years of fossil hunting have given us a picture of the Mesozoic ocean that is in some ways remarkably detailed. We know the names and body plans of hundreds of species. We know their diets from the chemistry of their bones and from the stomach contents of exceptional specimens. We know their sizes and their ranges, and the approximate periods when each lineage flourished and when each one ended. We have pregnant females and newborns and aged adults. We have bite marks and healed injuries and evidence of disease. The record is richer than it seems from the outside, and yet the gaps in that record are enormous. We do not know with confidence whether any of the major marine reptile groups were warm-blooded. This is not a trivial question. Warm-bloodedness, the ability to maintain body temperature independently of the surrounding water, would have meant the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs could hunt in cold water at depth, could operate at night when the surface cooled, and could sustain higher activity levels for longer. Some recent analyses of bone chemistry suggest that at least some ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs may have maintained body temperatures warmer than the surrounding sea. But the evidence is contested and the question is open. We do not know how the plesiosaurs used their long necks in practice. The stealth hunting hypothesis is plausible and has good support, but there are others. Some researchers have proposed that long-necked forms might have swept the neck laterally through schools of fish, using the neck as a net. Others have suggested the neck was held elevated at the surface, while the body remained submerged, allowing the animal to breathe and observe simultaneously from a position of elevation. The anatomy does not rule out any of these possibilities conclusively. We do not know how they communicated. They had ears. They heard sound in water, as all animals with ears that are submerged will hear it. Whether they produced sounds for social use, for navigation, or for hunting coordination, we have no direct evidence. The possibility that plesiosaurs or mosasaurs had a social structure more complex than solitary hunting is not ruled out by the fossils. We simply do not know. New species are still being found at a significant rate. In the past 2 decades, ichthyosaur species have been described from Chile, from China, and from the Canadian Arctic. Plesiosaur species have been found in Morocco and in Antarctica. A mosasaur species described in the last few years from Morocco showed body proportions so different from established forms that it required a significant revision of how we understood their ecology. The picture is not complete, it keeps changing. Every significant new find adjusts something we thought we knew. The ancient ocean keeps its secrets with the same patience it always has. We are reading a record that is fragmented and incomplete and extraordinary, and we are reading it slowly, one cliff face at a time. 66 million years ago, an object approximately 14 kilometers across entered Earth's atmosphere at a speed of approximately 20 kilometers per second and struck the shallow sea off what is now the coast of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The impact released energy beyond anything we have a useful comparison for. The rock at the impact site vaporized. A crater approximately 180 kilometers across formed within seconds. The explosion sent debris into the upper atmosphere that spread around the planet within days. The debris blocked the sun. Temperatures dropped. Photosynthesis slowed and then largely stopped across much of the planet for months, possibly years. The base of the food chain, the plants and the phytoplankton that all other life depends on, was cut off from its energy source. What followed was the most severe mass extinction in 190 million years. Approximately 3/4 of all species on Earth went extinct. the non-avian dinosaurs, which had dominated land ecosystems for 165 million years, disappeared entirely. The pterosaurs, which had filled the air for the same period, were gone. The ammonites, which had been the most abundant large invertebrates in the ocean for most of the Mesozoic, vanished. And the mosasaurs, which had been at the height of their dominance and diversity at the moment the asteroid arrived, were gone. The plesiosaurs were gone too, all of them, the long-necked forms and the plesiosaurs alike. Every lineage of marine reptile that had spent the Mesozoic era developing its particular solution to the problem of life in the ocean was erased. Hold this fact without immediately moving past it. These animals had been in the ocean for 180 million years. They had survived every other perturbation the Earth had produced in that time. They had survived the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event that wiped out approximately half of all species on Earth at the time. They had persisted through changing sea levels and changing ocean chemistry and changing climates. They had outlasted whole other lineages of animals that could not adapt to what the Earth was doing. And then they were gone in an interval of time that is essentially instantaneous by geological standards. The ocean survived. The water was still there. The planet continued. But the world that had produced those animals, the warm and shallow Mesozoic Sea, full of ammonites and belemnites, and the particular abundance that had allowed the marine reptiles to reach those proportions and that diversity, was finished. The ocean that emerged from the extinction was a different ocean. It would be populated by different creatures, built from the survivors of the catastrophe rather than the rulers of the world that had preceded it. The ancient sea had ended. Everything that came next would be shaped by different forces from different starting points. There is something that lives in the modern ocean that the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs never encountered. It is not a predator. It does not hunt, and it does not compete for food. It does not breathe, and it is not alive. It is plastic, polyethylene and polypropylene and polystyrene and nylon, in the form of bags and bottles and fishing line and microplastic fragments. These are now present in every ocean on the planet, from the surface to the deepest trenches, from the equator to the poles. The ancient sea that the marine reptiles ruled was extraordinarily rich. The ammonites were everywhere. The fish were in numbers we can no longer fully picture. The large predators at the top of the food chain were there because the food chain beneath them was so productive that it could sustain them. That productivity was the result of millions of years of ecological development, of niches being filled and relationships being established, and energy flowing upward from the sun, through plankton, through invertebrates, through fish, through the animals we have been describing tonight. The ocean we are currently living with is a fraction of what that ocean was. The large predators are fewer. The fish populations are a fraction of what they were before industrial fishing. The coral reefs, which are the ocean's equivalent of tropical rainforests, in their diversity and productivity, are dying at a rate that is accelerating with every decade of warming water and acidifying chemistry. The whale populations, which were already drastically reduced from what they were before the 19th century, are still recovering from 200 years of industrial hunting that eliminated most of their largest species from most of their historical ranges. We have not arrived at this through one sudden catastrophic event. the way the Cretaceous ocean ended. We have arrived at it gradually, through a series of decisions and practices and economic arrangements that were each individually justifiable by the logic of the moment, and collectively disastrous for the ocean system they depended on. This is harder to see than an asteroid strike. It does not leave a single clear layer in the geological record. It leaves a gradual diminishment that is easy to normalize, because each generation inherits an ocean that is already smaller than the one before it and does not know what it is missing. The mosasaurs did not know the asteroid was coming. The ocean had been stable for so long that there was no framework for the event that was about to end it. We are in a different position. The frameworks exist. The information is available. The thing that is happening to the modern ocean is not invisible, and it is not mysterious. It is simply very difficult to look at directly, which is not the same thing. The ancient sea is gone. The one we have now is the one we are responsible for. The ocean did not stay empty. After the asteroid, after the long cold darkness that followed the impact and the slow return of light and the gradual rebuilding of the food chain from the survivors, the ocean began to fill again. It filled with different animals. Animals shaped by different evolutionary pressures. Animals that had inherited a world cleared of competition and were now free to expand into the ecological space that the mass extinction had opened. The whales were among them. They came from land mammals, the way the marine reptiles had come from land reptiles. The transition was gradual, over millions of years, with the same incremental modification of limbs into paddles and bodies into hydrodynamic shapes. The first true whales appear in the fossil record approximately 50 million years ago. By 35 million years ago, some of them had reached sizes that rivaled the largest mosasaurs. By approximately 15 million years ago, the ocean contained something we would recognize as the whale world we know today. Baleen whales filtered krill in cold polar water. Toothed whales hunted fish and squid in warmer seas. The dolphins followed, more recently, smaller and faster and echolocating in a way that gave them access to prey in the dark that no marine reptile had possessed. The great sharks, including the ancestors of the modern white shark, evolved and diversified. Sea turtles, which had survived the extinction, continued and diversified into the forms that still cross the ocean today. The seals and sea lions and walruses evolved millions of years after the marine reptiles were gone, from different land, mammals making the same ancient choice to re-enter the water. The ocean that exists now is the product of this second wave of marine life, built on the ruins of the first. And what is absent matters. There is no ocean-going reptile today, apart from the sea turtle and the sea snake, that matches in any way the scale or the dominance of the Mesozoic marine reptiles. The whales are large, but there is nothing in the modern ocean that functions as the plesiosaurs functioned. There is no animal at the apex of the marine food chain that is 15 meters of reptile, with a skull 1.5 meters long and a bite force that could crush bone. That particular solution is gone. The sea turtles that still cross the ocean are ancient. Their lineage predates the mass extinction. When a loggerhead turtle swims over the spot in the Atlantic, where a plesiosaur once hunted, there is a continuity there, a thread that has persisted through 66 million years of change. That is not nothing. The sea turtle is a survivor, not a victor exactly, a survivor, The ocean kept going after the marine reptiles were gone. It keeps going still. It does not mourn what it has lost, because the ocean does not operate in the register of mourning. It simply continues filling and refilling, reshaping itself around whatever lives in it. This is the ocean's great gift, and its great indifference, held in the same gesture. Return for a moment to the sea that no longer exists, the warm, shallow water, the sun reaching the bottom in the shallows, the long, narrow head breaking the surface for a breath, the enormous eye, the largest eye of any vertebrate in the history of this planet, catching the light for a moment before descending into the dark water below. We came here tonight to learn what ruled the ancient ocean, and the ocean gave us answers, creatures of extraordinary variety and extraordinary adaptation. Air-breathing reptiles that solved the problem of marine life with a completeness and diversity and duration that no group before or since has matched. 180 million years. Ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs and mosasaurs and all the smaller, stranger, less famous forms that filled the spaces between them. An ocean that was as complex and competitive and richly inhabited as the ocean we know, built from entirely different pieces. And then an asteroid and silence, and a different ocean slowly filling with different creatures in the long aftermath. What remains of the ancient sea is in the stone. It is the bone of the ichthyosaur pressed flat in the limestone of southern England, the skull of the mosasaur falling out of the chalk of Kansas, the skeleton of the plesiosaur that Mary Anning found in the cliff at Lyme Regis, laid out in the cold salt air with the sea below it, the bones emerging from the rock, one careful hour at a time. The stone is the archive of the ancient ocean. It does not forget. It does not exaggerate. It holds what was there with a fidelity that no other record matches. There is something that does not resolve itself into a lesson here, and we should not force it to. The marine reptiles did not exist to teach us anything. They were not a rehearsal for a more important world. They were the world as complete and as valid and as beautiful in their own terms as any world that has existed on this planet before or since. They occupied their ocean the way anything alive occupies its world, by being fully present in it, by being shaped by it, and shaping it in return, for as long as the ocean was theirs to occupy. That it ended is not the point. Everything ends. The ocean that contains them now is made of different water than the one they swam in. The continents are in different positions. The chemistry is different, and the temperatures are different, and the creatures are different. But the ocean continues. It continues being the place where the pressure is immense, and the darkness is complete, and the things that live in the deep remain largely unseen. It continues being the place that holds its secrets better than anywhere else on Earth. The marine reptiles knew that ocean from the inside. They breathed its surface air and dove its dark water and hunted in its midnight zones for 180 million years. We are on the outside of it, looking in, trying to understand from bones and stone and slow scientific inference what it was like to live in that world. The ocean keeps its old secrets well. It always has. And that, perhaps, is the point.